Good evening. Who's here at South by Southwest for their first time ever? Anyone? Wow, a lot of people. And then folks who've been here before? All right, it's grown, isn't it? Hasn't changed? Before speaking at South by Southwest, before I've been talking about the book and about making ideas happen. And this year I was asked to really talk about how we're connecting the creative world and share a little bit of Behance's story, as well as some of the realizations we've had in doing what we're doing. And also I wanted to sneak in some realizations from the whole startup experience. Who in here is involved in some way with starting up some new project, whether it be on their own or within a larger company? All right, good. So I think that will be relevant as well. Cool, so I'm going to jump in, and I'd love to save some time for Q&A and hear what's on people's minds. Our team at Behance, for those of you who don't know, we came together about 7 years ago to help try to connect and organize the creative world. We just felt like life is made interesting by creative minds with willing hands. Everything that compels us to take any sort of action, to buy something, to engage with something. Creativity also helps us understand the world around us, the news that happens, and obviously helps define culture as we know it. And at the same time, the creative community is probably one of the most disorganized communities on the planet. And so our team came together and said, with all these creativity conferences and creativity books and schools that we go to teach us the tools of the trade and creativity and design, et cetera, what if there was a company that focused on the opposite? What if instead of creativity, we focused on organization and execution and the stuff that the creative world really needs? And that was the impetus for Behance. And in fact, we decided at that point that we would never use the words creativity or inspiration in our product. It would always be about the other stuff, the missing curriculum, if you will, that all of us need to create and build and make ideas happen. And so that was Behance. This is Matthias, my co-founder, and I in Barcelona in 2005. Just starting to get this up and running, and he and I still work together in our office in New York. So certainly partnership has been a whole part of this story for me, and the team has really grown over the years to be just a really fun, vibrant team of people who have this shared interest to help connect and organize the creative world. When I think about some of the things we had in common, getting Behance off the ground, we had a real passion for design and technology and creativity and how those two things intersect. But we also had a lot of industry resentment. We thought that there was so much BS in how the creative world operates. A lot of us had either worked in agencies or had studied some information design and understood the headhunters and the middlemen and like a lot of the stuff that we just felt could be optimized, not necessarily removed, but just optimized and improved. We also were frustrated by a lot of our friends who had creative careers and would talk about all the things they wanted to do and start. And then we check in with them 6 months later, and they would talk about the same things, and 6 months later they talk about the same things, and they wouldn't get them off the ground. So there was a lot of frustration rumbling behind the scenes as well. And so we got a team together, and we said, okay, let's try to have us work at the intersection of three things. Either the skills that we have as a team, the genuine interests that we have, the things that kept us up at night, the things that were fascinating to us, and then the opportunities that presented themselves. And the opportunity was really around 2006, 2007. We realized that the creative industry was starting to become more independent, and that there was a real opportunity to do something there. What we did that was a little unorthodox is we decided to focus more on a mission and less on the medium. And this kind of maybe set us back a couple of years, you could argue. We started focusing on a paper product to help organize creative people. And I remember people saying, you're starting a paper company? Aren't the margins horrible in that business? But we just realized that this was the physical manifestation of what we were trying to do, which was to actually organize creative people and get them to be more focused on taking action and being proactive in their careers. And so that paper product unfolded into a task management tool that we built for ourselves and still use and let other people use as well to help organize in the creative process. We started a blog where we went to hundreds of some of the most productive creative people and teams on the planet, and we would ask them how they execute. And we called it 99 based on that Edison quote, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And so we were always obsessed with the perspiration part. And we even created a 99% conference. Of course, this brand was then hijacked by the 99% movement. but at least we weren't the 1% conference. So that was the 99%, and 99 continues to be kind of our think tank around the execution of ideas. And a lot of the research that brought me into teams and meeting individuals who just, again, had a history of execution led to the book, which was also something really important for our team. It was sort of how we work, but also some of the methodology behind what we felt Behance should be. And became kind of a textbook for us as well. And all of this led, this mission-centric, medium-agnostic way of building a business. And when I say medium-agnostic, I mean, are we a tech company, a conference company, a paper goods company? Ignore the medium, focus on the mission. But we ultimately kind of came to this notion of a platform to showcase and discover creative work. Now, we had an interesting focus group in 2007, the only focus group we've ever done at Behance, where we brought in a lot of creatives that we really admired and knew, and we asked them, do you need a social network, to a professional network to showcase your work? And universally, people said no. We have MySpace. We have other places where we show our work. We don't need another place to put it. So we said, okay, that was kind of daunting to hear or upsetting. But then we said, well, what are you worried about? And people said, oh, well, I never get attribution for the work that I do. I never get credit. It's super hard to get discovered. The people who hire me are the people who always hire me, and it's hard to break into other places. And, oh, by the way, I spend so much time updating my portfolio and all this stuff. So what we really had to take that, you had to take that leap of recognizing that we're not really building what they want, but what they need, and taking away from this that we wanted to build a professional platform that accommodated or addressed a lot of their complaints and concerns. So that was kind of the impetus for the Behance, the platform, which really became the focus of our business. Using technology in this case to organize and empower creative careers, connect people, and perhaps even change an industry. So let's talk about the creative industry for a second. You create stuff. You create stuff with all sorts of tools, pen, paper, whatever you use. You create stuff, and then you want to showcase it. And you want to showcase it in as many places at once and as efficiently as possible. And then you want to have it be discovered, of course. And the discovery should take place where people are searching. And then the question is, well, what happens when people discover something? They want to engage with it in some way. And what does that mean? Engage means maybe they follow you and they stay tuned for additional work that you publish. Maybe they comment on your work, they appreciate it, they like it on Facebook. Maybe they click buy and try to buy it. Maybe they try to hire you in some way as a full-time employee or in some sort of part-time or contract basis. Those are all the sort of types of engagement that can happen. And of course, the more engagement that happens, and especially if it's commercially viable for you as someone who creates something, the more you're going to actually create stuff. And then there's this sort of cycle that happens, this beautiful cycle that grows an individual's career. And this, at the end of the day, is the industry. It ultimately comes down to people that create stuff. And so we always saw Behance as focusing on that showcase, discover, and engage piece of this, recognizing that that underbelly was organization. None of this would happen well unless we were a company that was obsessed with organizing creative people. And so that's sort of the model of Behance that we've been going with for a few years. I figured I'd share to give some context. So really quickly, and then I want to go into some of the realizations that we've had trying to do this. But for those of you that don't know, Behance, you put up your projects of multimedia content. You can embed video, audio, imagery, 3D rendering, all this sorts of stuff within a project. You give us some data related to who the project was done for, a client, an agency, personal work, what tools you used, all that stuff. You push it out there, and we try to showcase it everywhere we possibly can. We push it onto other galleries that we run across the web. We push it onto, obviously, mobile devices. We push it on literally tens of thousands of personal portfolio sites that we power for people, as well as portfolio sites for SCAD and RGA, or RGA as well, but also RISD and SVA and a lot of the major art and design schools and organizations around the country. So we're trying to just flawlessly, seamlessly help you get your work out there. But then there's the engagement part, which is when you're logging into Behance or when you sign up just to follow people, you need to always see not only who you're following and you work by them, but also what those people are appreciating and liking. And in essence, putting the creative world to work for you as your curator is one of the things we're trying to do on that engagement side as well. So that's kind of how the product works. And many of you know that we recently joined the Adobe family in December. And this was kind of always the holy grail for us, was the thought that maybe if we took the creation process or at least a lot of the tools that we use to create in this room. And we kind of plugged it into the process of showcasing it and then it being discovered and the engagement side of it. That sort of full system could be really exciting for the creative industry. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But that was the sort of the context behind Behance and Adobe coming together and why we thought it made sense. So that's a little picture of this team, that built these series of products and why, and some of the problems we were trying to solve, and the products and the ecosystem that materialized out of about 6 to 7 years of effort around that. But it's not enough. The web still sucks at a lot of stuff. And you'd think that the web would breed innovation and breed meritocracy and career opportunity, but in fact it doesn't. And in some cases, it actually subjugates its participants. It really actually sometimes gets in the way of a lot of these things happening. And let me elaborate on that a little bit and talk about 3 distinct challenges that I personally have been thinking a lot about and haven't really talked about publicly as much, but just thinking about with my team, and some possible essential realizations that come out of tackling these challenges. So number one, remember that term, the long tail, and how exciting that is for the web, right? The long tail was the notion that the web could be something for everyone, that everyone would find their community, and they'd be fully embraced by people just like them, even if there are only 30 of them in the world or 10 of them in the world, and that also you could build commerce and you could build all sorts of businesses that are focused on this notion of small, intact communities, regardless of scale. And so here's the question, is the long tail backfiring at all? Think about all these new communities that are cropping up, which are great in their own way, but knitting communities, small chef communities, photography-only communities, infographics communities. There's so many of these communities that are starting to grow and grab all of the people that are related to them into this isolated community. And which prompts the question, is the web verticalizing and thus isolating itself just because it can? We're all finding our family and then we're staying just with our family, living in a small remote village in the middle of nowhere in some cases. When we know that actually discovery happens in the overlap of different communities. It's really in the clashes of difference where all of the greatest innovation happens. This is obviously not a new idea. This dates back to Medici times, when you'd have a fisherman hanging out, having a glass of wine with an architect, or whatever they did in ancient Italy, and talking about some of the problems that they're facing in their respective careers, and then suddenly that would culminate in a new realization, a new discovery of a way of doing something. And so are we starting to lose some of this? In Behance, we've really tried to cater to all the creative fields, and we've oftentimes said, well, should we just focus on the graphic design and design community? Should we be embracing architects and photographers as well, and industrial designers and toy designers and culinary artists and makeup arts and stuff like that? But what we're seeing actually in the evidence is that we like to intersect. And in fact, it's influencing us. 95% of folks on Behance are following creatives in a field other than their own. And over 50% of our members publish a portfolio project in an entirely unrelated creative field. And if that's not evidence that all of these fields can and should be intersecting, and I don't know what is. You take, for example, a light design team. It simply does light design for shows and Broadway and stuff like that. You take graffiti artists that they are following and exposed to, and there's this mix of seeing both of these things. Then you see a new team called Graffiti Light Art, a new field called Graffiti Light Art, coming right out of, this is a team out of Cologne, Germany called Licht Factor, that is all about sort of taking graffiti arts and light and combining them and making a whole new field out of it. So I think that this is a critical part of the creative industry unfolding, and something we have to think about as we build communities in this room. You also really get a diversified understanding of the world. Our team came in after the Japanese earthquake, and we just started seeing a lot of projects being published related to this event, even 24 hours after. And we typed in Japan and earthquake. We started to realize that there were thousands and thousands of projects being published by creatives in different fields all around the world responding to this crisis. And it was really interesting to see the creative world interpret what was happening and using their talent, all sorts of talent, all sorts of creative fields, showcasing their work. And it makes you realize this is how we react to the world, understand the world around us. And so the realization number one here is that we need to try to host the overlap and all the things that we're doing. And when you host the overlap, you prompt innovation. And when you don't, in some ways, you could actually impede it. Number two, second thought, is just the notion of the masses and whether we are starting to empower the masses without discernment. The like button is now perpetual across the web, and every site seems to have their own sort of curatorial mechanism to helping the greatest work rise to the top. We have our own on Behance. It's called the Appreciate button, and every time you see a piece of work, you can appreciate it, and then when you log in and you sort by field, you see most appreciated this week. And it's a good way of curating stuff and making sure that you're not sort of seeing the stuff that might just happen every minute by minute that may not be so appealing. And I'm being kind. So then the question is the crowd a good judge? Take a great piece of architecture, for example, and ask what should matter more? What 1 million random people think of this piece of work, or what, say, 12 incredible, talented architects who have a verse sense of architecture and where it's been and where it's going? How should we think about this? And so I'd like to propose the notion of the critical mass, which is what we've always been obsessed with on the web, versus what I like to call the credible mass. And the credible mass is less about how many people like something and more about who likes something. And can we actually assign weight based on influence? When it comes to curation and community curation in the future, as these communities that started with just a cool way of seeing your friends' photos and stuff have now become industry transformative platforms that either could make or break our careers online, should we be thinking beyond how many people like something? Should we be starting to think about who likes it? And even layering in a dose of human curation on top of that sometimes? Is there like a hybrid model that helps make sure that the credible mass is perhaps influencing us more? If this were possible, would we all be living at every given moment a perpetual talent-driven sort of talent audition where you're just data-driven, data is sort of suggesting to everyone else in the world what we're capable of, what we're interested in, what we should have more weight in as a curator of stuff, and maybe this could help us match with great opportunity. So I think that's super, super exciting. I also think it's exciting because it can start to get rid of some of the stuff that is hurting us. I mentioned at the beginning, in many cases, the web is actually hurting creative careers. Here's one example, spec contests, crowdsourcing in its worst form, where this is an example, the brand Diesel wanted to do a new logo for 55 DSL, one of their sub-brands, and they went out and got 15,000 designers all around the world to compete by submitting a brand identity in the hope of getting a 1,500 euro prize. And we went to some of these people and asked them how much time they spent, and we heard a lot of them spent, or most of them spent on average 2 to 3 hours on this piece of work, which is definitely not enough to do great work and put your best foot forward. But it's also a lot when you do the math and you realize that over 4 years of 24/7 labor went into a 1,500 euro prize, which is actually a tragedy. And really gets in the way of our own careers and the great work being done, and I can go on and on and on, but the point being that maybe when we tap into the data, and maybe we understand what the credible mass thinks rather than the critical mass, and having great work rise to the top based on its merit rather than who knows who, maybe we can start to crowdsource from a smaller group of people that we know are good and incentivize them to do their best work by paying them. So I think this is one of those things that the web can do better, and this is how I think we can get there. So the realization here being that the credible mass may be one of the best routes we have to meritocracy. And as we're building communities and tools, we should start thinking about the implications of that and how we can foster it. The third realization is around attribution. The web really, really sucks at attribution. And because it does, opportunity is lost every day. This is one of my problems with some sites like Tumblr and others that host so many images from Behance users' portfolios that never get properly attributed back to the person. And if there is attribution in the form of a name, there's no link back to the actual project, and the image itself doesn't link back. And again, when people link back and they appreciate it and it goes up in the search results and people get more opportunity and they get more followers, like that's the ecosystem we want to foster. And attribution, when it's lost, really robs us of the opportunity that our talent garners us. So to think about attribution for a moment, let's just talk about the history of the portfolio. So the portfolio started as this static static sort of book that we would send around. It would gather dust on people's desks. It would always be outdated from the moment you sent it. And then it started to evolve towards a portfolio site that you could control and update, but still it sat sort of static in the ether, known to only people who already know who you are, and often would not show up in a Google search result for graphic designer New York or whatever people happen to be looking for. So that was a problem. And now with Behance, we're trying to push people more towards this connected portfolio solution, where everything is kind of updated and in sync, and you show it all in all places at once, and as efficiently as possible. But here's the problem with also portfolios that you think about, is that if in some ways every portfolio in the old version has always been a lie. I mean, how much work is really done by one person only? There's always the photo retoucher. There's the person who did the copy. There's the person who did the typesetting. There's the person who created the font that you use. There's so many people involved in a piece of creative work. And we've never had the ability of understanding the graph behind every piece. When you have a connected portfolio solution, you can start to actually understand who should get the attribution. And if you're a confident person applying for an opportunity that is a good match for you, you should be proud to say who you actually worked with. And in fact, your employers should encourage you to hire them to work with you on the project, which is even better. So in Behance, we're trying to take this to heart. With all the projects that we have, we're trying to foster co-ownership. Anyone can post it and share it with multiple people. It can live in multiple people's portfolios. And we're also pushing some of our partners and friends to do this. Pinterest has an attribution line now that they launched with Behance and 2 or 3 other sites, where every pin now actually shows an icon from the source that links directly back to the source. And when you actually open a pin on Pinterest, there are now 5 links that go to the source: the image itself, the title, and then 3 underneath that will either take you to the person's portfolio on Behance or the actual project, depending on which link you click. And that's powerful. That's why I think Pinterest is thriving so much. They're driving so much referral traffic, where the traditional mindset of the rest of the web typically is to maximize page views per visit and to kind of keep people on the site. And Pinterest is just bouncing right and left. And I think that's why it's working so well. And it's great for creatives. And when I think about the power of attribution, and the power also now of being a part of Adobe and having some influence over the way they're building product, is this dream of maybe someday when you're working on something in Photoshop or Illustrator, being able to share it at that moment and having the attribution truly associated with who did what. I mean, that would be a transparency, a level of transparency that the creative industry has never seen. And I think it would be transformative for creative careers. So the realization here is that with attribution, I would argue that discovery can outweigh referral, that the way we find who should do what, is suddenly going to be replaced by just us stumbling upon the right people for the right reasons and knowing exactly who did what and being able to engage them in the best way possible. So those are 3 realizations. And so to sum up this piece, I just want to say that, or pose the question, how will the web advance creative industries and culture as we know it? So to sum up, if you foster the intersection, that overlap that we discussed, great ideas will result and creative fields are certainly pushed forward. It's always how it's worked, and we should continue to foster that on the web. If you tap the credible mass, rather than be swayed by the critical mass, you will allow the best talent to get the spotlight. And this is really in our power as folks who build sorts of technology and tools like this. And then if you have an ecosystem that fosters attribution, you can discover and match the best talent with the best opportunity. And this, my friends, is creative meritocracy. This is like our team's dream goal. They always say you have like a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal, and whatever you do in your life. And this is, for us, what it would be. And as we inch our way toward, I think we're going to improve the output of the creative world overall and maybe make a dent on something bigger. So those are some thoughts, and I wanted to kind of pose those because I think they're still early, and they're germinating, but I think they're things that we could all think about and have great implications for all the work that we're doing. Now, I also wanted to share some personal kind of startup realizations that I've had now. Also, having gone through a real cycle of a business from start to acquisition and building a team and all that stuff, and thinking about a lot of the things I know certain folks in this audience are working on, and I figured I'd share some things that have been on my mind. Starting with the team. Obviously everyone talks about how important team is. The truth is that we had absolutely no idea what the hell we were doing. When we came together, my partner, Matthias, he had never designed a website. He was a graphic designer. I had no background in technology, and we really had to kind of teach ourselves. And as I look actually at the whole team, we didn't have any resources, and we didn't raise capital early on, and so we actually just had to hire people, who could kind of figure it out rather than have the resources to hire the best people who had all the experience. So we really had no idea what we were doing, but we obviously were tenacious learners and fixers. And I think that maybe this added another year or two to the timeline of what we accomplished. But if I had to go back and do it again this way, I would. And I think that just one of those pearls is the importance of initiative over experience. All too often we, when we're starting something, we have no choice. And so we hire people based on initiative. And so we'll look at that resume and look at the bottom line where it's like bonsai cultivation or whatever people put on their resumes. And it's like, oh, well, that's your interest. What have you done about it? Did you start a blog about it? Did you do this? You can test their initiative and what's interesting to them as a proxy for their ongoing likelihood of taking initiative and what you get them interested in. And so I think hiring on initiative over experience is, I would trade experience for initiative any day. And of course, when we become more successful and we have more resources, we become resume snobs. And we start hiring for experience over initiative, and I think that's where we go sour. Motivated by problems we're solving, is absolutely critical. And versus being motivated by who we're going to get funding from or whether there's going to be an exit and stuff like that. Thinking about for the love of something over the money. And I think about when you raise money quickly, the problem is you become incentivized to keep doing something that you may not love. And I think that's one of the fundamental flaws with the startup world, is that usually step one is to raise capital with the idea, rather than to live and sit long enough with it, like you would before you get married to someone or something like that, where you actually know that you're incentivized for the right reasons. And I just think that there were so many times where the money at the end of the road would just not have cut it. I think when you're starting something up, you kind of have to short circuit your reward system. If you think about it, we are built from day one to be incentivized by short-term rewards, by our parents' gratification, by a check on a test or a grade on a course, and then you get the worst, the weekly salary. And one of my favorite quotes is that the two greatest addictions in life are heroin and a weekly salary, because it just kind of keeps you going, and it sometimes gets in the way of you unplugging and doing something remarkable to you, not to anyone else yet. And so when you're doing that thing on your own, you kind of need to short circuit yourself. I think we're all fooling ourselves to think that the long-term vision is enough to keep us motivated on a daily basis. In truth, we actually need to create our own little trickling reward system. For us, it was actually the fact that when you typed in Behance into Google, it always said, "Do you mean balance?" And we were like, someday, Google will not think we're a mistake. And then Beyonce came popular, and we had another problem. But you want to kind of create your own sort of rewards that keep your team motivated, even when there's no customers yet, and there's no revenue and whatever else. Resourcefulness is more important than resources. I've seen so many people blow through so much money or other resources and not do anything. And I've seen so many people do so much with so little. And so just that premium of resourcefulness is just so striking to me, certainly in retrospect. In terms of the mentality of starting something, the point I made earlier about mission being more important than medium is something that I think is more true and possible now than ever before. You think about when Facebook started, and they were spending millions of dollars just to get their initial server set up. And now you can get even more power than they had for $12 a month or whatever through AWS. You can get all the back-end technology you need, the CDN services, you can get the domain registration, you can get the terms of service, you can get the operations side of your business. You can have a paper product and you can have an online service, do the distribution and the payment and the fulfillment. Everything can be virtual and basically done for a small monthly fee. And so we've almost reached the point where the friction of being in a medium has been reduced. And so now you can actually pursue multiple mediums to actually really push one mission forward. And I think we're going to see more businesses and brands be agnostic to the actual mediums that they use. I mean, when you think of Amazon, is it about books anymore? Or is it about so much more? I think that we're going to see more of that. And as we start companies, these tech VCs and this VCs and that VCs, they'll catch up a couple of years after this all happens. When passion is involved, obviously business becomes very personal, and we all know this, that creating something from nothing truly tolls your heart, your mind, your soul in more ways than I can express. But what I wanted to propose to you is this notion of, I'm calling it the relative joy of entrepreneurship, and the notion being that when a new idea strikes, energy and excitement is extremely high, and you are full of joy, and you love being an entrepreneur. It's a lot of fun. And then you start to realize that no one cares, and no one's taking your calls, and there are 5 other people doing the same thing, and all this stuff, and you kind of go into a real sort of sad place, and it's the doldrums of project management and trying to convince people to work with you and whatever else. And then it's all about little wins, little micro wins that go up, and you feel like there's hope, and then you go down again, and then you go up, and you feel like there's hope, and then you go down again, and I guess my point would be is that the best we can actually do is aspire for a positive slope. If you can kind of just know that incrementally you're getting a positive slope on the relative joy of entrepreneurship over all the trials and tribulations, then I think that's the sign you want to see. And when you feel like your plateau, everyone is lower than the one before, maybe that's when you should start asking if this is the right idea, or if you should do an iteration or some sort of pivot. So that's another thought on that from a mentality perspective. And then lastly, on the sort of the perspective of leading something new and pushing it out to the world, one of the hardest decisions for us was taking our first round of funding, which was 5 years after we started the business, and really bootstrapping it all the way. And the question that ultimately I tried to focus on more than all the other implications of having a board and all this other stuff was the question of, were we doing our greatest work we could ever do? There were people on our team who wanted to hire certain people and they couldn't afford it. There were things we wanted to do with our infrastructure to invest in it and we couldn't afford it. And I started to get the sense that my job should be to be the wind at the backs of everyone else on the team. And if people felt like they were being held back from doing the greatest work that they've ever done in their lives because of some decision that I was or wasn't making, then I wasn't doing my job. And that's when it became clear. And by the way, frankly, the same thing happened when the opportunity came up to join Adobe. The question was, what are we really focusing on? And what do we really want to do? Does this team want to just stick with it and in the startup mode? Does this team want to just leave and do something else? Or does this team want to kind of make this impact and help make creative meritocracy possible? And that was sort of when it was about, we want the wind at our backs. The ability of being in every creative tool as we're creating, and then having that be part of this ecosystem, and maybe surprising everyone with how much less friction could be in the system and how much more connected we could be as we create. Maybe that's something that's worth working for and making a decision that is really hard in order to achieve. When you agree to do right. Obviously, as all of us are starting to build ideas, and we obviously like to commit to everything. And that was certainly, if I look back on the mistakes we made over the past 7 years, it was stuff that we didn't really want to do, but we committed to just because we didn't have many other options, and then we didn't do it right. And so now it's all about that discipline. And it's just a last point. And then finally, I just want to say that writing the book and going into a lot of the folks who had remarkable career trajectories and asking them to think back about, at what point did they realize that they were really onto something? At what point were they willing to take a major risk in their company and kind of staying with it and getting a new kind of bold, somewhat unpopular role that they believed in, or leaving altogether and writing their book or starting their business or writing the next best, the best next American novel or whatever. And the theme was that these folks talked about a moment where they started to gain confidence from being doubted. For some reason, like for example, there was a guy at a big publishing house, and he was on the track to be kind of the top sort of editor, publisher type person in this huge company. And for whatever reason, 7 or 8 years ago, he heard about this job opportunity called digital publishing within the same company. It was like another team of 2 people just starting it. And he just kept thinking about how that would be a great career move and how important that would be. And for some reason, whenever everyone started doubting him and people were saying to him, "What are you, crazy? No one's ever going to read a book on a computer. Don't leave this fast track to the top and join this fledgling group of people who are doing something insignificant." For some reason, the more he heard that, the more he realized, that if everyone thinks you're crazy, you're either crazy or you're really onto something. And he just started to gain confidence from the doubt that he was getting, and he felt more compelled and more committed to make that big jump. And I see that across the board, that folks often talk about a turning point where they learn to gain confidence from doubt. And so I encourage you, know the difference between cynics and skeptics. Obviously, always seek feedback and incorporate it. But when you really are starting to feel it and you're in your zone, make sure that you actually gain confidence from the doubt you get. And recognize and remember that nothing extraordinary is ever achieved through ordinary means. Nothing extraordinary is ever achieved through ordinary means. Thank you for being here. Thanks. So I tried to leave 15 to 20 minutes, and what I thought, I'd be happy to answer questions about anything, but I could certainly talk about our efforts to connect the creative world and some of the thoughts around the creative, sort of future of creative careers, and you're welcome to disagree or pose any challenge. I'd love to discuss it with you and hear your thoughts. I'm happy to talk about the Making Ideas Happen stuff and some of the research around some of the most productive teams and how they work and what they do and don't do. And I'm also happy to talk about the startup experience and anything we've learned, either the easy way or the hard way. So anyone have questions they want to throw out? And I think that do we have any mics? Or you can just yell it out, I can hear. Oh, there's a mic where? Oh, great, there's a mic where people can queue up. Any questions or thoughts? Like, seriously, small informal gathering, no big deal. Yeah. Okay, big fan of ProSite, which is our tool to help manage your personal portfolio online, connected with Behance. Yes, the question is, do we have plans for a response? A very technical question. Do we have plans for responsiveness and ProSites? And the answer is yes. So we have a lot of stuff we're working on in that area, and that's something I want for my site as well. Yes. Yeah, so this is a great question. And then we'll start queuing up there so people can hear the questions. But how do you manage creatives when they're your best friends? And so this is sort of the question about, managing with, not over. And I mean, honestly, the best answer is know what to divide and conquer. A lot of management foes happen when there is misunderstanding around who's responsible for what. And then ultimately people feel like they're trumping each other. There is a practice that I've seen some teams do where they make a bit of what they call it's sort of called a responsibility grid. And so basically the idea is you write all the things that you need to decide on with the team that you work with. Whether it's every day or every week, things that may come up. Whether it's to take on a new client, that's a type of decision, or whether it's to bump a deadline, or whether it's whatever decisions you feel managers in a creative team need to make. And then you meet with your partner or colleagues that lead the team, and you decide which ones anyone can make on their own, which ones only certain people can make on their own, and which ones everyone must make and ultimately have consensus on together. And it's the third one that becomes the bottlenecks the most. Because if you have too many things that everyone says, oh, I need to approve of that, I need to approve of that, then you've got another problem. And so what I've seen some teams do is go through an exercise like that and try to reduce that third category of stuff everyone has to agree on in order to make an action, really reduce that to an absolute minimum. That should be stuff like, well, we're going to sell the business, or things like that. I think that you need to kind of get a good sense of that. But that's a great tool, I think, because then you have flexibility. And no one can say to you later, hey, you made that decision without me? It's like, of course I did. That's what we decided we could do to keep things moving. So here's a question right there at the mic.
Hi. Excuse me. Cody Carroll from SY Partners. My question is about the issue of a business model. So as you were coming up, did you always have sort of an ecosystem play in mind? And did the business model sort of evolve over time? Did you have different sort of paths that you explored? And how do you sort of navigate that decision process?
Yeah. So with the business model, there were two parallel business models. One was to just keep us in business and pay the bills.
Sure.
And then one was, let's build a really valuable and transformative business over the long term. And then when we raised capital, we started to reduce our focus on the first and increase our focus on the latter, and make some decisions according to both of those scenarios. And the vision was always, over the long term, this ecosystem. And the question was always the supply and demand. Do you start with a marketplace where people come and say, I'm looking for talent? Or do you start with people getting a great utility out of showing their work and getting as much exposure as possible? And what we realize is that when people are hiring talent, oftentimes the best talent is not necessarily looking for a job. They're not necessarily proactively going out there and saying, I need to be hired. But they do have the necessity of taking credit for the work that they do and getting attribution and making sure that their peers see it. And everyone, no matter how great you are, you work with other people and you want to know what they're working on. So if we could provide that indispensable utility, which is the supply side, you could argue, then the demand side of people wanting to see who's doing what and finding talent and stuff, that would come second. And that's one of those key points in any business model, is deciding, especially in marketplace type of businesses, is which one do you start with. And then we started with we launched a job posting sort of business. We started some premium features for members of our platform, and I think what we'll do is we'll evolve more into that demand side as well. I mean, we're going to start to try to help people search and filter through all this data in more efficient ways.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for the talk. I've got a question. Have you seen any emerging models in creative servicing that you think are particularly interesting in terms of new trends?
So emerging models in creative servicing, like agencies
Yeah, beyond the agency and the crowdsource model and the kind of independent freelancer collective, have you seen anything else?
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing a lot of things. I'm seeing companies that used to hire agencies of record who would then hire smaller agencies, who would then hire headhunters, who would then go geographically, disperse and hire individuals to do the work, are starting to question why they do this. They're starting to wonder, well, wait a second. Creative wants to make more money. We want to pay less money. The output of the creative work is almost like a game of operator. It's like, oh, this needs to change. Oh, this needs to change. This needs to change. This needs to change. And then before you know it, the change is not what you wanted it to be. And so they're starting to question that. And what some of these large companies are doing is they're starting to experiment with bringing creatives in-house in some way. The challenge with that always is on the project management side and finding the right people and then managing them on an ongoing basis and paying them and some of those friction points. And I see a lot of companies that are starting to address those friction points. So that's one answer. The second thing is I see a lot of agencies creating their own rosters of people based on some of the data that they can find in Behance and other sites like it. And then they're pitching sort of briefs promising payment. So it's not crowdsourcing, it's not spec work. It's almost like in the architecture industry. You find 5 or 6 firms that you think are reputable. You basically pay them for their time to come with an initial set of plans or a proposal. They might lose a little bit, but they basically break even with the thought that one of the 5 or 6 will be the one that gets the full bounty of the project. And so we're seeing that happen, but it's more of in a piecemeal basis rather than having a system that manages that. Do you have a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, it's about the culture of creative agencies, and do you see them evolving in a way to kind of accommodate newer digital talent? There was a quote of yours I heard, I forget where you said that agencies say there's a lack of digital talent, but it's that they don't want to work in a cubicle doing your shitty work.
Yep.
And, do you feel that there's I work in advertising, by the way, sorry. Do you feel that you're seeing any kind of evolution of culture to kind of accommodate
Absolutely.
new kind of talent?
If you're one of the greatest digital folks out there and everyone's contacting you and wanting to work with you because now it's easier to see who actually does what, then you're asking yourself, well, why am I going to work and working in a cube every day when I can kind of be running my own business? And then you're running your own business as you, and you're like, wow, so many people want work from me that I need to hire someone else to help me. And then you hire another person, and then another person, and then another person, and then you're an agency. And it all happens all over again. But I think that it's super exciting. It's super exciting for individual creative careers to take off like that. And again, with the friction points that I was talking about in terms of managing yourself as a business, we've never been at a time, and really until more recently or now, where you can actually do that and grow a meaningful business. So what are digital agencies doing, or agencies in general, to try to retain this talent? I know some that are trying to engage talent on their own terms. They're saying, listen, you want to be an independent professional, you want to have client exposure and whatever, great. You'll be a partner of ours. There's an agency called Co, based in New York, started by the former creative officers of JWT, Rosemary and Ty, and they're trying to do just that. Co is a collaborative of all these different smaller agencies and individuals who are brought in a SWAT team-like approach to kind of do work for specific clients. They're testing it still. It's too early to, jury's out, I think, but there's experiments going on, and I'm excited about where they might go.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name's Eli. Well, that's loud. From the Austin Center for Design. I was curious about the new partnership with Adobe and what it means for Behance, what plans you have in the works.
Yeah, I think that what we all know about Adobe is that they have been in the business of making the tools that we use to create for a very, very long time. And as software that is shipped on a relatively infrequent basis, right, with the upgrades and stuff like that, but also with it's sometimes a 16-month time between software is done and then gets into our hands as the new version. And now it's really exciting because Adobe has suddenly said, wait a second, why don't we use Creative Cloud as a way of just allowing people to download every application that they ever want to experiment with, even if they're not familiar with how it works. Just like download it, install it on your computer, and instead of having to pay for a huge software suite that is, on an infrequent basis replaced, you can actually get all the latest tools, and they can be upgraded every night. So I think that that's a really exciting move. And as they do that, and it becomes more of a service offering, and that's what Creative Cloud is now, I think Adobe's also thinking, well, what else can our services do to help reduce the friction in the creative process and help connect people through it? That's obviously why they thought Behance would be a really good fit. And what I've been really surprised by is just how open Adobe is to the potential of a more connected creative world, and how within Adobe people who have made these tools think they can be better. And I think that they recognize that when you tune into how a community is using something in real time, you can better serve that community than if you take a snapshot of it and develop software and then release it 16 months later. So it's really exciting that they're allowing us to kind of influence that a bit. And it's also great. For our team at Behance, we've always wanted to take the ability to connect with the creative world around you upstream in the creative process. Right now, when you're working on a work in progress, you have to do a lot of stuff to take it and post it on a site like Dribbble or Behance and get feedback on it. And what if we could sort of make all of that more seamless and connected and attributed back to you as a really key part of this? And I think we can help push in that area as well. Thanks.
Hi there.
Hello.
I think there's a lot of great talent in this room, and I think a lot of people have the kind of talent that they could actually do something with, but a lot of times it's fear of failure or fear of taking risks that prevents them from doing whatever it is they could do. Could you speak on that a little bit, either in the creation of your business or at particular times maybe growing the business, how you dealt with that fear?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because on the one hand, I want to say that there was a part of me that always had like the hedge in mind of what my backup plan would be and what I could learn from this. And at the end of the day, it always was like, well, experiential education. I'm going to learn more by trying this than and the value of that experiential education over time will be more than the salary I compromised by not being in that safer job. And I may have been just rationalizing and making up a story for myself to sleep well at night, or I don't know. But there is something to be said, though, about, I call it committal benefits. When someone has an idea and they tell me how excited they are about it, but they're like, but yeah, I'm still doing my day job and I'm doing this on the weekends and at nights when I have the energy. I'm less likely, obviously, to either want to invest or introduce them to other people that I know that could help them with their business or whatever else. But when that person sends that email, I left my job today. I am starting a new business, 100% in. Suddenly, you want to like do everything you can to help them. Those are the committal benefits that you garner when you suddenly take that leap. And so it's perhaps the bridge that wouldn't be there when you take the jump. And I think that too many of us want to hedge too much, and we end up never getting those committal benefits that we need to take the leap, and then nothing ever happens. So I mean, there's no good answer for how to feel comfortable with the risk. It's gut-wrenching. It's absolutely gut-wrenching. And you know, as I look back and wonder, would I ever want to do that again? It's like masochistic, having to go through that again. But at the same time, there's something about it that is really magical when you're going through it with people that you respect, and when you feel like, you know what, I'm working for something that I believe in that could be bigger than even what I expect. That's exciting, and just make sure that you do it with a community supporting you, because if you attack ideas and pursue them in isolation, you're unlikely to be held accountable to them, and you're unlikely to get those committal benefits that could make all the difference.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We have 7 more minutes, so any more, yeah, keep firing.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about how you're trying to host overlap, empower the masses, and also like just make attribution something really key, forefront. My question is, in terms of the meritocracy, how do you also balance that with young creatives that are trying to start out and trying to make a name for themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the things I'm most excited about with the credible mass stuff that we're exploring at Behance. And because the idea is you could be a junior at some art school, or you could be in a small town in remote Romania doing some great work in fill in the blank. And if someone with some level of credibility in that field comes along and recognizes your work because it's good, that could matter more than the accolades you get from a huge mailing list, or your social media following being big already because you're already a well-known quantity. So I actually think that we can help facilitate some of that meritocracy by tuning into the right people to designate it as such, to designate it as good. But I also think that there's a lot of other data in the work that can help you discover it. Like for example, I mean, I was thinking the other day about the way that someone uses a tool like Photoshop. Could you leverage data like that to determine how good someone is at using Photoshop? I mean, same thing with cameras, or I mean, there's so many, as we're in this world of, the Internet of Things that everyone's talking about. It's all the rage these days with everything being connected to the web. Can we start to get insight into how good people are at certain things that trumps who they happen to know or the old boy network that they happen to be a part of? So I think that there's ways we can do it. I think it's hard to get there, and when I put on creative meritocracy, I'm by no means suggesting we're there or even close, but I think that we should do things that help us edge closer rather than further away.
Okay, to follow up with that,
Yeah.
Beyond meritocracy, you also talked about having the initiative is something that you value a lot. How do you kind of value that to someone that's just starting out but don't have a lot of work that shows that merit?
Yeah, and when the example I gave about the interest that they have in their life that may have absolutely nothing to do with what you're doing as a business when you're hiring them, still, initiative is the best indicator of future initiative. And so when you measure the initiative they've taken in the past with stuff that's interesting to them, they will do so again. There's just a type. Some other investors I know call it the X factor. And they talk about, oh, this person, what's their background and what's their idea and how good is it? But then they're like, well, do they have the X factor? And to me, it's just that drive, that tendency to take initiative and what's interesting to them that just is unyielding. And I think you can test that by asking people, regardless of what stage of life they're in, what have they done to take initiative in the stuff that they have found interesting over the course of their life?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi.
Hi, I really appreciate the talk, so thank you. I have a heart or an interest in the education system in this country and
Yep.
in reforming it and making the jobs that are really in high demand align with curriculums and professors' knowledge base. So my question is, do you have any goals or plans in regards to this or any ideas
Yeah.
on how that can be done? You have a lot of proprietary information in regards to analytical data about what jobs are available in the creative industry.
Yeah, I think about this all the time. I wish that people got opportunities based on merit and in drive and initiative rather than quote unquote experience. And a lot of that is what it says on your resume in terms of where you went to school and what grades you got, which, as we all know, is really not correlated with the important stuff. So, but the world is obsessed with measurement. And as they say, we only manage what we measure. And so when we're trying to change the education system, it's a sad statement of humanity, but it sounds like we need things to measure in order to change the way we educate ourselves and our children and stuff like that. So what alternative forms of measurement can we begin to quantify? And can we, like the credible mass stuff, I also think that there's another side of this story is that I think we need to bring back a bit more of the apprenticeship culture. A lot of the experts that I meet, in my life, and I'm sure you feel the same, when you ask them about where they really got good at what they do, they always talk about sitting next to somebody. They always talk about someone who was not only a mentor, but like they were an apprentice too. They got to really learn from and just absorb. And we're starting to lose that a little bit. Well, we've lost that a lot over the years, with just the way the education system has unfolded. There was a great TED Talk that is either online or will go online soon, where they talked about how the education system as it is right now was built, when the UK was colonizing the world. And they needed to educate everyone to do the exact same thing and think the exact same way so they could be placed in all these different colonies all around the world and operate the same way. So it was this homogeneous kind of approach to having us all be, robots. And that became the traditional education system that we conform to today, which is diametrically opposed to what we need. I know I'm preaching to the choir now, but I think part of it is recalibrating what we're measuring rather than defying measurement altogether. That's where I would sort of argue with people who are like, well, abandon measurement. I just don't think we're able to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Hi.
Hi, Scott. Thanks a lot. My question relates to something you mentioned about crowdsourced design. How are you, do you have any plans to combat crowdsourced design using the Behance network?
Yeah, I mean, well, personally, and as a team, we've been really against the notion of spec crowdsourcing. We feel like, from the creative's perspective, it is sort of like discount sushi, where you did it because it was like, oh, okay, it's cheap sushi, and then you wake up the next morning, you're like, oh, like it wasn't my best work. It is attributed to me, which is even worse in many cases, and I didn't get paid for it, and it's lost time that I'm not even proud of, and that's. Plus, with the client side, oftentimes we're hearing clients say, it's just so much kind of crap, and I don't think any of these people really took time studying who we are and our brand, and there's a lot of kind of, what do they call it, carpet bombing, where you kind of take the same logo and you put it into everything that you can enter, and it just perpetuates this stuff that runs contrary to the idea of great talent being matched with best opportunity and putting out the greatest work that they've ever done. So we're against the idea of taking advantage of creative talent and perpetuating that system. But what we do think is that you can find the best talent and you can kind of use the crowd to source who you should be working with. And we actually think that the best indicator of someone's future work, obviously, is their portfolio. So when you're looking to find people and you follow their work, you get an updated version of their portfolio every time they update it. And you get new projects when they do them for clients and whatever else. And in Behance, you actually get an email every time someone you follow completes a piece of work for clients. And those emails get forwarded around to other people, and that's how people get hired. So I think that there will be a new way someday of crowdsourcing. And it will be a different model, where maybe people will use our API to do this, or maybe Behance will do some form of it, but where you actually can tap into the creative world at work, identify a small group of people based on the past work that they've done, invite them to participate in something that they care about, pitch them briefs, and guarantee them some form of payment to respond, and then find the person that's the best match and hire them. I would love that to happen. I think that would be good for everyone. Thank you again for coming, and see you around.